Hello, all, and welcome to a new episode of the Horror Countdown podcast. I'm your host, Don Anelli, and tonight I have a special guest with me from the House That Screams podcast, Miss Candy Allison.
Hi. So happy to be here.
Thank you for being on. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I'm super excited.
Yeah. So for tonight, we are going to be discussing our top 10 queer horror films. As I usually do, this is your pick. What led you to choose the topic?
Well, I think now more than ever it's relevant. I'm a member of the queer community, and we've had a resurgence in the horror genre with these themes, and we're seeing them come to prevalence in older films that we may have dismissed in the past, and it's definitely present in the newer horror films.
All right. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's begin with our list. What do you have for your number 10?
Okay, anyone who knows me knows that I have to preface things, and I'm going to preface my list with, yeah, go ahead and come at me. I know these are kind of typical, but my reasonings are going to be very different from anyone else. So, number 10 for me, I'm starting with the very least, is Jennifer's Body.
Nice.
Um, and that one is a pretty obvious one to pick. The reason it even made my list is because though this is a really kind of awfully written movie and the dialogue is so cringe, um, I think we have some genuine actual affection, not just for shock value, with the relationship between Jennifer and Needy. And of course everybody was like, "Oh, the lesbian makeout scene." It's like, "Okay, that's cool." But what's cool actually about it is it wasn't just like the male gaze version. It was the lesbian community, the queer community, the bi community, everybody was actually very into it and showed more of like the depth of how a friendship or what seems like a friendship can be a little bit more. So I have to give it that.
Yeah. I know what coming from. I mean, being a male, I was kind of, it wasn't a big reason for me to see the film. It was more, it's a horror film, so I'm going to see it anyway. But yeah, I can't lie. That would have been an attraction just to move it up the list, so to speak. But I do know where you're coming from, where you see the theme about it, being more about their friendship and relationship together rather than it being sexually exploitative.
Right.
So yeah, I gave it props for that. It didn't make my list because it wasn't as prominent a part of the film as I wanted, and it wasn't as well developed.
Oh,
But it
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I do respect it for what it does, and yeah, it's a solid film. I mean, I enjoy it on a more base level than it being included for something like this. But yeah, it's a solid choice, and I see why it's included.
Awesome.
Yeah. My number 10 is another off the beaten path mark. So I'm going to be a little bit honest. I'm not as familiar with this one as I should be, just because I haven't seen it in a while. But I'm going more for historical significance, and the reason is I'm putting it at number 10 is because it just deserves to be mentioned more than anything. I'm going with Dracula's Daughter, and like I said, I wish I was a little bit more familiar with this than I should be. It's from 1936. It's the follow-up to the Bela Lugosi Dracula, and it concerns his daughter, who is, from what I remember, she is not necessarily attracted to the idea of being a vampire, but like I would want to say at ease with it, and trying to integrate into society and try to not arouse suspicions that she's a vampire, while also dealing with the fact that she's attracted to this teacher in this small town that she happens to live in. And like I said, I wish I was a little bit more familiar with it because I haven't seen it in maybe 10, 15 years now. But I know that there's a lot written about it and its significance to the community and the genre as a whole. So I figured might as well just include it in there just for making it honoring its historical significance rather than my personal connection to it. So it's a when I wish I could say a little bit more about, but it's one that I felt just deserved to be mentioned because of that. So don't know if you've seen it or not, but
Actually, as much as I love horror, the only thing cinematically that equals it in my obsession is classic films. So, yes, I am familiar with the film. There's actually quite a bit of interesting history behind the film that I urge people to seek out. That's like a whole separate conversation. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting. I don't care for the film itself.
mhm.
Um, Maybe it's because I know the history of the film and what goes on behind it, but
Okay.
I always tell people, and I say this a lot on my show, but when kids were collecting comic books, I was the only comic books I ever liked were EC Comics, of course, from the 50s. So I collected those, but I was collecting classic films, and so like they're like, "You're 10 years old, what do you care?" And I'm like, "It's so neat, I love it." So yeah, so when you get classic and horror, like I'm your girl. But yeah, I get why some people love it and put it in this category, but I also it didn't make my cut. But I see it and I understand and I get it
Yeah.
completely.
I mean, like I said, I wouldn't know how I would feel about it now if I had seen it because like I said, it's been at least 10 years since I've seen it. And I mean, I'm just saying, it's been 2010 at minimum since I last saw it, and I would probably venture to say I saw it even earlier. So I don't know how I feel now, but it was just one of those where I felt that it needed to be just mentioned at the very least. So I made it number 10. If
Yeah,
I actually had more familiarity with it, would it have even made my list? I doubt it. But I just felt that because of its historical significance and being one of the first to actually breach the topic of lesbianism in genre film, I felt just at the very least passing mentioning it.
definitely. I completely agree. And that's the beautiful thing about having personal top tens is getting these different perspectives. And it's
Yeah,
definitely I agree with that it should be mentioned. Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah. All right. So that moves us to number 9.
Okay, number 9 for me, and people are gonna be surprised I did not rate this higher because they know that I'm absolutely obsessed with the film. I actually even cosplayed as it, a couple years ago, is The Love Witch. I'm a huge, huge fan of Anna Biller and her work, and The Love Witch just blew me away. And it was actually given that it's made by a feminist filmmaker and people are like, "Oh, it's not really a horror movie." I'm like, "Well, we can go down to semantics all day, but it technically a horror movie. If this is, a video store, it would be in the horror section." But The Love Witch is more about queer coding and sort of the friendship in that. You know, we have the neighbor who's fascinated with Elaine the Love Witch, but also kind of wants to be her and kind of wants to be with her. And it's not super subtle about that. And Elaine the Love Witch was all about trapping a man, but it was really, really about, the female relationship in this. That's really the whole core and essence of this. And I think, obviously it was an unhealthy attraction, but, we are talking horror here. But, So here's this woman, Elaine, the Love Witch, who wants to be every man's fantasy, but she doesn't respect him. She doesn't really love them. She just wants to be loved so badly. And and it was with Trish, her neighbor, that, who was giving her the attention that she really craved, and that ended up becoming such a toxic thing as any relationship can. So I thought it was definitely worth mentioning. And if you haven't seen The Love Witch, see The Love Witch.
Yeah, it made my honorable mentions list, to be honest.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah, I'm a big fan of it as well. It probably would have, it may have even bumped out Dracula's Daughter if I would have seen it recently, just to compare the two. But yeah, I really like the way it plays with their relationship together. I like, I get a lot of the feminism arguments about it, and I get a lot of where everybody comes from in, portray in praising it for the, you know her as a character for what she's going through and all of that. But yeah, it just bumped out just because I feel it, like, maybe this shouldn't have been 2 hours. That kind of is a big that's kind of like a big push for me.
I'm a slow burn kind of gal, and I always
Yeah,
advertise that as well. I like
I
slow
get it.
burns, so for me, like, the longer the better, if it's worth it. If it were building up to something interesting, or you're keeping my attention, and so I'm always like pimping that movie out. I should like
Yeah.
that should be my part-time job.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, I really like it myself. I probably would have just maybe cut it down a couple, but I still really like the film as is, so I'm not terribly complaining about it. But just because of I think it's too long, I kind of just bumped it off. But it still made my honorable mention. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it as well.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah. So my number nine is kind of a newer film. I don't know if many saw it, but I really recommend it. And I was able to see it last year. It's called Death Drop Gorgeous.
I never got around to seeing that one yet.
Oh yeah, that one's a lot of fun. I really recommend it. So I'm gonna try to be as vague as I can, just like I said, because of lack of attention to it. But concerns a guy who lives in an apartment with his queer best friends. He's questioning his sexuality. He finds himself more attracted to men, but he's not ready to fully come out yet. And he lives with his roommate, who's the flamboyant, outspoken gay guy. And he gets a job in a bar run by a local drag queen, and comes to find out that there's a serial killer stalking gay men in the neighborhood, and wondering whether or not he's going to be part of the rampage. And I really enjoyed this. This is a lot of fun. So you have, the two stereotypical gay characters. You have the flamboyant, outspoken, guy who's the life of the party, like the, effeminate guy that's always, I'm trying not to be as, rude as I can, but like that,
It's a bit of
hey,
a trope. Yeah, it's
I'm
a
saying like
trope.
hey, kind of like the gay, like the outspoken gay guy, the type. But
Yeah, both of my brothers actually.
oh, okay. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to be rude, but
Oh, no,
it's
no, not at
yeah.
all. I'm not offended whatsoever, and they wouldn't
I
be
know.
either.
Like I'm saying, I'm trying not to be, but it's like that kind of a character. And then you have the one who's open and willing to experiment, but hasn't come out yet, so he's kind of just a little bit more on the reserved side. And he's surrounded by drag queens. He's surrounded by the old school glamour lifestyle. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. It mixes a lot of slasher elements in there. There's a lot of giallo inspired kills.
Ooh, like it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It barely missed my end of the year lists, but yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I really recommend it. I don't remember where it was streaming. I know it's on all the usual sites.
I'll check on Shutter.
I don't know if it was there. I got it more from because I mean, I'll promote myself just a little bit. I do work with Shutter. I do have access to their collection of films.
Oh, okay.
But I also work with a couple of other companies that do VOD stuff. So I don't remember if it was direct, if it was through Shutter, if it was through the VOD companies. So I'm saying like maybe check like Vudu or Amazon or like sites like that rather than like a Netflix or a Shutter or something like that. I'm saying check more like an Amazon or a Vudu or iTunes even more than I would say check Shutter or Shutter or Netflix. I don't think it's for through there. I think it's more through like regular on demand VOD.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna add that to my famous list. We just record like mad people. I'm in charge of the schedule, so we record like a mad woman, I should say. So
Mhm.
sometimes I don't get around to watching movies because I'm rewatching movies because I do 2, 3 shows a week sometimes. So um, yeah. So, but that's going on the list right now.
Cool. I'd love to hear your thoughts because I know that I know that there's a few people that have seen it and they're similarly just as high on it as I am, if not more. So I would imagine that you'd really like this as well.
Sounds like it.
Cool. All right. So we'll move on and hit our number eights.
Okay, number 8 for me. Um, I had to make the list. And I like it more than a lot of people like it. I think it was one of those movies. It wasn't. I think it got appreciation in 1983 when it came out, but now we're everybody, everybody's a critic these days. So, they can't give it the credit that it deserves anymore. The Hunger, um, David Bowie and his early androgynous status of the 70s and didn't, a lot of the amazing acting he did in the 80s. And this film, first, let's state the obvious. Vampires are the gay icons of horror. It's kind of a saying. But this movie is tragic. A lot of it doesn't make sense. It's very, very artsy. That gets like at least 50% of the crowd drops off right there. They're like, no, do I want to watch an artsy film from 1983? Well, it's vampires, not in like the traditional sense, although it does sort of have a goth feel. But and I'm not great with French, but Catherine Deneuve, is that correct?
I've heard her name a couple of times, and I think that's how it was. But
Okay,
it's been a
it's a
while.
guess.
It's been a while since I last heard her, just because I don't know if she's still acting anymore. But from the
And
times I remember, I think that was how they said it.
so yeah, hopefully that was my best guess. But
Yeah.
Catherine Deneuve's character, kind of collects companions. She's a 6,000-year-old vampire, and when well, I, do I give a spoiler alert on a movie this old?
Uh,
um,
if you want to, go ahead. I mean, I'm not one of those where I'm gonna say this. It's on my list, but I don't mind for spoilers.
okay, it's very, very artsy, very male gazy with its lesbian themes. Um, as Catherine Deneuve goes for a new companion, it's Susan Sarandon, and I really like that Susan Sarandon pushed for the bisexuality and the lesbian sex scenes as strongly as she did as an actress. She's a phenomenal actress. This is a movie full of phenomenal actors, and but but their huge lesbian sex scene is just a little exploitative. Um, Whereas I think that if we were to redo this and do it better, which can absolutely be done, unfortunately not with David Bowie, but I think they would do it differently. I think that was just, tiptoeing around in 1983, which is that's a lot of stuff in the 80s. And this was a film that was not trying to just be a horror film, but like be just an all-around attention grabber. and it does that, and I do like the incorporation of just, like, it doesn't matter what the gender of the companion is, it's just a lot of, lust for, you know, any gender, anybody can be a companion, and you'll see that that's a repeating theme in my list. But so I do like it for incorporating that, and it was pretty brave for the time. But looking at it through modern eyes, it's a little male gaze. It's a little bit exploitative. But it could have been even more cringy had Susan Sarandon not pushed, and I really appreciate Susan Sarandon for that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's on my list, and a lot of those are the reasons why I put it on there. Um, I'll probably just reserve for now, but yeah, yeah, it's on my list as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So my number eight is kind of a weird one, and I kind of put this on there because I think it's one of the better parts of the film. And a lot of people, I don't know if they ever really if they really overlooked it, or if it was something that has probably just become more prominent over time. But my number eight is actually Cursed, the Wes Craven werewolf movie.
Oh wow, it's been a minute since that came up in conversation.
Yeah. Well, like I said, yeah, I think it's because of a feature in the film that a lot of people realize, and a lot of that is Milo Ventimiglia's character, which I forget his name, but a lot of it is based on his bullying of Jesse Eisenberg's character for being gay, where it turns out he's actually gay himself, or Milo's character is rather than Jesse's. But the idea of at the end of the film, there's a scene where he comes out and proclaims that he actually has been gay all along and was attracted to him, and even though he gets declined, the idea being that the idea, he still comes out and he's still able to feel confident enough to portray a sexuality as open as he does, even in spite of the fact that he was bullying the character that he actually ends up coming out to. I think that's a pretty fun commentary on the society and the scene at large, whether or not it was intended to be as such. But I really I do enjoy the rest of the film. I don't think it's Craven's best, but I think it's a serviceable enough film for the mess that went on behind the scenes. But yeah, just because of like I said, that one influential part of the storyline, I wanted to include it.
Well, and I think that's important. A lot of these themes that we bring up um, are so very actually prominent in the community itself. Um, I have a tendency to get too personal. Not that I mind, but it bothers other people. But that's similar to what my younger brothers went through. They were bullying gay kids, and they were gay.
Mm,
And it's something, a little bit of art imitating life. Um, I don't think, society's changed enough now that,
right.
kids don't feel the need to do that as much, but it's absolutely, a truth, a real thing. And what I like to say about horror is that it is the most freed genre of filmmaking because people don't take it seriously, if that makes any sense. Because, and that's going to be a recurring theme in the rest of my list.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it probably wouldn't. It would probably be a little different had it been done now compared to 2005. But
Correct.
yeah, I still give it props for the decision to do that storyline, and then not only to give the character at least somewhat of a happy ending, because now he's as they say, living his true self, but they don't go the route of killing him off to make sure that he's wrong for his bullying. He's able to repent and learn his ways and become who he really is. I think that's a pretty interesting way of going about it. So I mean, props Wes for going that route.
Well, we all love Wes,
Yeah.
even when we don't. necessarily love the film.
Yeah, like I mean, like I said, the film's got problems, and I mean, some of that is the film itself, some of that is the production, but behind the scenes. But it's a conversation for another time.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to our number sevens.
Okay, so are you ready for the bonkers candy everybody expects? I'm gonna get real fucking weird.
Uh,
Okay,
Go ahead.
I could not rate this higher on my list, but I felt the need to include it because this movie has come under attack for my love for it, and I'm not. I'll just spit it out. Sleepaway Camp 2. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Cue
Really?
laughter. Yes, and let me tell you why. For one tiny, tiny reason. It is because the character of Angela Baker, and spoiler alert, this is not the first time I'm going, or yeah, this is not the first time I'm going to bring up Angela Baker. But in Sleepaway Camp 2, we have a grown up Angela. She's out of the mental institution, she's at a new camp. And that's it. Here's the important part. You got to think about this is 1988 amidst AIDS panic, amidst all of this terrible social climate we have going on in our country, and we have a transgender woman who is, everybody's like, well, you're really a man. It's like, no, I am a woman. I've had the surgery. I am a woman. I've always been a woman. It's just for that. The movie itself is bonkers, fucking ridiculous, silly, but that I think is pretty important for 1988. So there is one of my left field takes, and
Hmm.
I stand by that. I will defend that. And everybody's like, "How can you love that heaping trash pile of a movie?" Like, I think it's a fun, stupid slasher for just one of those nights where you're chilling, but I think that's important. Just that tiny, tiny little thing.
I'm a fan of it myself, but I don't remember that scene in particular, so I would probably have to go back and watch it again under this kind of a lens, because if it is out, that would probably add a really interesting take to the film.
Yeah,
I
it's a blink and you miss it kind of thing, but it is
Okay.
there, and it is addressed in that way, so where she does say that, and, I think that's important.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, like I said, I'm a fan of it as well, but I probably may have missed it, so that's not a bad choice. I mean, it's probably not as off the wall as my number seven, because I went off the wall as well.
Okay, it's a trend.
Yeah, my number seven is Seed of Chucky.
Honorable mention.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess it wasn't as off the wall as I thought it was. To me, this is all Glenn and Glenda. I mean, yeah, obviously, I know the homage that it's referencing the famous transgender film of the same name from Ed Wood, but I the idea of him being who he is, and the idea of a lot of all of the issues and themes that he goes through, from identifying with his parents, identifying with himself, coming to terms with the fact that he's an inanimate doll come to life, and is trying to, one, repress his sexual identity, and two, repress his homicidal tendencies. I think that is, you know I mean, I don't think it is. I mean, it really is. It's genuinely the best part of the film.
It is,
But
it is.
yeah, I mean, the rest of it is, a flaming shit pile. But
Thank you. I was gonna say, shit, but you did it better.
yeah, yeah, the rest of the film is a flaming shit pile. But the one thing that I do like about it is that, even though it's a campy theme to bring up in the series to begin with, I still like to think that that's handled far more maturely than what everybody would have expected it to be. And I think a lot may have just written it off as a goofy subtext that was just inserted just to add tension between, Glenn, Glinda, Chucky, and Tiffany. But looking at it recently, I really came to see that was actually far more intelligently written than what many may have given it credit for.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting and dynamic part of the film, and I really appreciate the way that it's included into it. Yeah, it comes off a little hokey just because it's still a killer doll come to life, but
And all the bonkers shit that goes on in that movie. Oh
well,
god.
yeah, that's the other part of it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the fact that it's a killer doll come to life is part of it, but it's still, to me, I think the most interesting and the most well developed aspect of the film, and it's one of the better. It's one of the only good things about it.
Totally. I agree.
Yeah. All right. So that brings us to number 6.
Okay, number 6 for me would be High Tension, which was, sort of the beginning of French extremism horror getting on the map. When I, always sort of had my ear to the ground, of course, with horror films coming out. And at this point, I was way into J horror and, big Takashi Miike fan. And um, so I was working part time at a video store at this time when it came out in America. And I didn't even realize it was French. I just grabbed it because I heard a buzz, and the buzz I heard was just a buzz. No, nothing concrete, nothing. I had no idea what the movie was about. I didn't even read it. I just put it in and watched it. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And we have, of course, our unreliable narrator. We have a plot that doesn't quite make sense at the end, doesn't all add up, but the effect of it taking, first this very extreme French film, putting Alexandra Aja on the map. But we have this twist, and if I'm ruining the twist for you and you haven't seen this, I'm so totally sorry, but I can't discuss it without doing that. Um, we have a love story, if you want to call it that. Let's call it an obsession story.
Mm.
Um, two friends. Yeah, I'm not going to give you the plot, but basically, with this movie, we have the obsession angle, which we usually see as a man preying on a woman, typically in our slashers, even with our villains. But here we have Marie, who is obsessed with her schoolmate Alexia, and Alexia's family gets slaughtered, and Alexia is attacked, and Marie wants to protect her, and Marie is getting attacked, and then we have that fucking ending. And it's all due to Marie's obsession. We find out we've had an unreliable narrator. And when that happened, I was like, what the fuck? But I thought it was really interesting. Um, and I'd like to, at this point, because this is gonna play into the rest of my picks, say, some of these movies within the community can be polarizing. We have very divisiveness. On the whole, most of the community embrace these films like, oh, well, of course, the lesbian's the killer or obsessed, or of course the transgender person is a murderer. No, that's not the point. A lot of these become icons. These actors become part of the community and celebrated by people within the LGBTQ plus community. So, we can't discount that. But so this was an interesting story to make it, a nice little twist on the typical man preying on a woman obsession. Or occasionally it's a woman preying on a man, but it's usually the man preying on a woman and being obsessed with her and ending up trying to kill her. And we've got that in a complete, lesbian obsession here. And I really like that. And it's a fantastic film. Um, it's crazy ride. It's a roller coaster, and I think it's fun. It's not for the faint of heart. If you're not into extremism or extreme horror, it's not for you. But I think it's that plot is so important. Just to say something.
Yeah, it's an honorable mention for me as well. I do agree. I like the twist that it's a woman, and I think it should be pointed out that Marie is actually given a masculine look, maybe to try to make it seem a little bit more palatable why she would be obsessing over her the way she does. But uh, I I'm trying to dance around my thoughts because as much as I like the twist ending involving her not being being an unreliable narrator, I think that comes at the disservice of logic and reasoning within the film itself.
Oh,
But
absolutely. That's why I have it at 6 because I it
yeah,
doesn't make any sense, but, I
yeah,
guess in that kind of film,
I,
it doesn't need to, you know?
yeah,
It's one of those kind of films.
yeah. I know what you mean, and that, like I said, that was it made my honorable mentions list for that reason. But when it comes to tackling the themes in this film, I do like where it goes, and I do like the some of the scenes at the end where she's just like approaching her with that look in her eye, and I can just imagine that if this was flipped into being a male, that it would just be absolutely terrifying. Not that the idea of it isn't to begin with, but I would imagine this would have been even higher regarded if it would have been a man in that role instead of her. So,
But I also think it was a brave choice to
oh
make it a
yeah,
woman because haven't we seen that story so many times with it being a man, you
exactly,
know?
yeah. And I mean, like I said, some of that could have been, maybe he gave her that that haircut just to help sell it a little bit more.
Oh,
But
I think so. I think so.
yeah, um, in terms of applying for this criteria, it's a great pick. Just at the end, I just pushed it just off my honorable mentions, but yeah, solid choice overall.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, my number six is spoiled. It's The Hunger. But like I said, a lot of what goes on here, and you were touching on it, where it's the bisexuality, where they make it a point not to be completely dependent on one because of their gender, that they're able to move effortlessly between them just because of who they are as a person. To do this in that time period, I think that was a really intriguing choice, and it adds a lot to the film as a whole, just because it takes a relationship and it adds a sour taste to it because it is a tragic love story, but it's still wrapped up in the confines of a genre film, and you still get your vampiric excess, you still get the blood drinking, you still get your normal you still get your normal vampire fix, so to speak, but you wrap it up in a really intriguing and dark love story that happens to involve a triangle between people of both genders. And I really appreciate the film for what it does, and I really think it's an enjoyable film based on what it does.
Yeah, yeah. I wish more people would go out and rewatch it.
Oh, definitely. I can't wait for the day when either Arrow or Scream Factory gives this a proper collector's edition and people can really appreciate what it is. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, I wish I could have said more, but you said a lot of great points.
I'm
In
so sorry.
No worries. I figured we would have had more crossover. I'm actually kind of surprised we have more honorable mentions than actual films on the list, but I think that may change when we move to our top five. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, let's hit your number five.
Okay, so I cheated a little bit.
Oh,
Um, you'll understand where I'm going with this. Number 5, I'm gonna say The Haunting slash The Haunting of Hill House. Um, and I'm leaving out the 1999 one because fuck you. Um,
there's a remake. Hint, hint.
yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So, one, I'm a big bibliophile. Um, the book that Shirley Jackson wrote is phenomenal, and the bisexuality of Theo being featured in that novel in the 50s is a big fucking deal. So, for it to even make it a little bit onto the screen in 1963, cool. And one of my favorites, I have 2 favorite current horror directors. One would be Mike Flanagan because he gives shit so much heart and scare, and, Ari Aster would be the other for, he's just phenomenal. But the Haunting of Hill House series, this is where I cheated a little bit because I did include it a little bit here. Because I felt like I would be remiss to not bring that up because Theo's bisexuality is much more. Actually, in the Haunting of Hill House series, she's actually just a lesbian. So
Hmm.
I think that's very important. Um, that Mike Flanagan took that and made it a prominent piece of Theo without making a big fucking deal about it. Um, and that's how things are done now because society has changed. But the fact that it existed at all in the original work is a big deal. I mean, it was edgy, it was taboo, it was kind of tiptoed around in the 1963 Julie Christie movie, but it was there. The subtext was there. And you can't you can't tell that story without putting that in there. So, I had to kind of double mention those. And yes, I know that The Haunting of Hill House was a series, but it's a limited series if that counts. I had to mention it.
Yeah, no big deal. I wish I would have remembered it because I would have put the series on as well. I do have the original film on my list as well. So I
Awesome.
knew, yeah, like I said, I knew we'd probably start picking off a few more normal list titles instead of honorable mentions. But yeah, it's on my list. But
Awesome.
yeah, my number five is Let the Right One In.
Ooh, good one.
Absolutely. And this is probably, I would say, a bit more under the radar than a lot of people would realize as being relevant to the community at hand.
Correct.
But yeah, a lot of it comes from the fact that Eli, especially in the book version, because it's expanded upon in greater detail, but even though it's still touched upon in the movie, but in the book version itself, Eli is she's a centuries old vampire, but the idea is that the famous scene involving her not having any genitals is a reference to an act that occurred back in, I believe it's the 1600s, maybe 17s, somewhere in there, where boys that were discovered to have beautiful or pure singing voices were highly praised in various circles and were essentially castrated in order
Yeah.
to
They're
I
really referred to as the castrati by
yeah,
ancient Italians. Yes.
right, yeah,
Anne
anyways.
Rice's Cry to Heaven is a great book for that, by the way.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't ventured beyond the big three, so may have to check that out. But anyways, like I was saying, the theme is that the men were castrated and became castrati, like she mentioned, so that way their voices would remain pure throughout their lives. Because as you age, your genitals drop, you get bigger balls, and your voice becomes deeper and higher. But because they're castrated, they can't go through that, so their voice remains the same throughout their lives. And this is implied as the backstory for Eli, where this was the idea of this is who he was at the very beginning. Now he's become a vampire. He has to remain that way throughout his life. And coming upon Oscar, she's able to blend in by pretending to be a girl by choosing to identify as a girl because she no longer has her genitals anymore. She can pass off as a girl and move forward and move and remain I guess undetected by identifying as such. So yeah, yeah. Even in spite of that theme, I absolutely love this film. It's one
It's
of
it's
it,
so great.
it's amazing. Yeah. I do like the remake. It's just the main problem is it's not Let the Right One In, which I think is kind of a detriment. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a detriment, unfortunately, but it is there. But I still urge anyone and everyone to see the original one of the best films out there, and probably one of the, if not, it's in the top five best vampire films ever made. And in the topics of this discussion, one of the five best LGBTQ plus genre films ever. So
Yeah, it is really great, and it's one that kind of flew under my radar. Um, Usually it's me educating Sean, my husband, about movies, but he educated me about that one. And yeah, I completely agree.
nice. So let's head to our number four.
Okay, this is a near and dear one to my heart. Um, and it I have a little bit to say about this one. It's the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I know people are gonna be like, it's not really a horror movie. Well, okay, horror nerds, I know. I'm a horror nerd too. It's not scary. But would it be classified as a horror movie? Yeah, we have cannibalism. We have a lot of themes that technically fit within the horror genre. It's a musical, which is even better for me. I love musicals. Uh, yeah, so the most important thing to me about this film is, this is a box office flop, and it made the midnight movie scene just explode, because it was picked up by the queer community, um, as a representation, and this whole community built up around it. When I was 18, 19 years old, and younger than that, I was shadow acting in this every Saturday night. I would close the video store, rush over to the theater, and of course, being a blonde, nobody has probably seen blonde pictures of me in years. Since I dyed my hair black, I feel liberated. But I was always Janet, wanted to be Frankenfurter, got to do that once, when Frankenfurter was sick. But the community itself is just, it was such a place to belong. Everyone belonged there. It was like the ballroom scene. Um, as in, like, if like the LGBTQ ballroom scene, like everyone belongs. It doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your pronouns, it doesn't matter what you like, what you didn't like. And we're talking about this, I was doing this in the 90s. So it was every walk of life, but most of it was people who identified as gay or lesbian or queer or bi, or and it was just a place to be you. And around this movie where we were dancing and singing, and it had horror themes, and it, you know, and then it's a popular Halloween movie. Um, so I felt like it had to be included, and it was so important to my life because it wasn't until the last couple of years of my life where we've had more prevalence of this, that I knew I wasn't straight, but I knew I wasn't gay, and I knew I wasn't bi, but I didn't know what I was. I knew there was a place for me, but I couldn't think of a word. I went through conversion therapy. And I'm glad I did. I have two wonderful children, and they're growing up on me. My oldest, they're mentioned a lot on the House of Screens. So my oldest is 21, and I'm glad she has the freedom to identify as bisexual. But I know what asexuality is now, and I'm an asexual person, and I just knew that I didn't quite fit in anywhere, but I fit in with Rocky Horror Picture Show. And so it's so special to my heart, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, that's not really a horror movie, but I beg to differ.
So do I mention now that this is my number four for almost those exact reasons, or
That
how
is
do we?
so fucking amazing, really?
Yeah, it's my number four. I'm less leery on it being a horror film, but I think in terms of the importance in the conversation it brings about owning your true self and identity and being at ease with who you are, I can't think much more else about it. I mean, it not being a horror film kind of knocked it down on my list, but in terms of what it brings to the table, I think it's absolutely important, and I put it on my list for that very reason.
It's so interesting that we have it in the same place for the same
Yeah,
reason.
like I said, is this the weird part where I say it's number four as well?
No, that makes it cool. That doesn't make it weird.
Well, definitely. I mean, I don't have the personal attachment you do for obvious reasons, but yeah, like I said, just because of its importance and its place in the community, what it values, and you mentioned it being, the launch of the camp cult midnight movie thing. It absolutely deserves a place of mention. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think, and I always argue the case. Um, One, working at video stores, it was in the horror section, but like that's semantics. But for me, it's just so. I'm such a huge Misty, meaning for anybody who doesn't know what that is, a Mystery Science Theater
Mhm.
3000 fan. I have been since I was a 10-year-old little girl, and I believe that it the fragment of this gave birth to what would later become MST3K, which is the nearest and dearest thing of all things, cinematic or television wise to my heart. And I see the massive tattoo on my right arm of that, and so it has that also the special meaning to me. So I didn't know if you were a fellow Misty, but I thought I'd throw that out there.
They have their episodes. It depends when they're on. I love them, but I think there's been a few times where I'm kind of like, okay, this is just 2 hours. That's just a drag. But I do like more episodes than I don't. So
That's
I'm
great
not
to hear.
fully I'm not a fully fledged one. I would say it just depends on the it depends on the episode. I want to like the new series. I'm just not there yet.
I took to Jonah pretty quick. Which surprised me because when Joel left and Mike came on, I was like, "What is this?" But then,
Okay,
um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, see,
So
I
I,
well, I didn't I wa- I didn't come to it when it originally aired. I came to it later on, because a friend of mine in college, he was a fan and he taped everything, so I saw through him.
oh,
So
okay.
yeah, I wasn't there when it came out. I wasn't even aware it came out because I kind of grew up in that time period.
I was about to
And
say, I'm gonna venture a guess and say you're younger than me.
yeah, I'm in my mid 30s, so
Yeah, I'm 42, so it was just like
yeah.
prime time for me. Yeah.
So yeah, I was still growing up when that came out, so I wasn't aware of it, and it wasn't until I went to college and he was my friend in high school. He was a fan, so I used to borrow his tapes because he had them. So he still had them on VHS, which for those of you that are unfamiliar, they are rectangular boxes. They were rectangular boxes. They were usually black, and you would be able to record onto them, and you would be able to preserve them and play them on something called a VCR. So
God knows I spent my time around those. I worked in video stores clearly, as you've been able to tell this conversation for a long time.
yeah. So yeah, those small gray boxes that you see floating around that everybody sells for $300-400 a pop, they're called VHS. And a friend of mine used to have Mystery Science Theater on there, so that was kind of how I saw it.
Well, that's so cool. So if you're ever looking for recommendations on that, I'm your person.
All right, so let's move on to our number three choices.
All right, top three. Here we go. I'm probably gonna get some puzzled reactions to my number three pick, um, because it's so restrained. But I think it's important, and maybe it was the time that it came along. The year would be 1994. This is 15-year-old Candy. But Interview with the Vampire. Now, my reasoning for that is because I call the 90s the puritanical times of horror. We had some great stuff at the right at the beginning, like Candyman and stuff in 92 and all that. And then there at the very end when we had the neo slasher boom, or the beginnings of that, the roots of the neo slashers. Um, come back in, but there for a while it was pretty dry. And Interview with the Vampire, for as much as it doesn't show in the film, it's implied. And there are 9 people on my podcast. It's a circus, but a lot of them were talking, some of the, just regular just straight males that are on my show, which is most of the people on my show. Um, they were kind of like, well, when Brad Pitt and Antonio Banderas get really close together, like, were they gonna kiss? Like, kind of horrified. Like, even this is a recent conversation. I'm like, well, in the book, they do more than that. Um, I'm a big fan of Anne Rice, and I truly believe that Anne Rice is the real successor to Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker, who wrote the original Dracula, was a closeted gay man in the 1800s. And Anne Rice's vampires are how I like my vampires. They are gothic. They can't have sex, but there's a lot of eroticism and sensualism. And for as much as they didn't show in the movie, I'm surprised that they show as much as they do. It's very much implied. And I remember reading the original Interview with Vampire when I was, I was a little book nerd. So I was 9, and my mother let me read whatever I want. I was already a Stephen King reader. And I was like, Mom, why do they always pair up in same-sex couples? She was very open and very cool. And she explained to me, she's like, well, if you had to be companions with somebody for hundreds of years, who would you pick, Candy? Because divorces happen all the time. Best friends are best friends for life most of the time. And that made so much sense to me. So, and why I like my gothic vampires, why I like this, it's a love story without the complication of sex. And that is the asexual in me coming out right there. I don't have the pressure of sex, but it can be sensual. There can be love. There can be romance. Don't have to have sex. It's great. Like, fuck, I want that life. And I really think the film, for the most part, it really holds up. I rewatch it frequently. We did it I think it was last season on The House That Screams. So this film, for as much I know that how restrained it is, but I still think they got away with more than we thought that we were gonna get. Those of us who are familiar with the book. So it makes number 3 for me because an important film to me.
Nice. It missed the mark for me. Based on one of the things you said is that the book goes further. And yeah, I do blame, the studio system at the time for not wanting to indulge in that kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, for exploring that side of their relationship.
Sure.
But yeah, because the book does it better, I kind of didn't put the movie on my list, but I still respect it. It's a great choice. I mean, I do really like the movie, but for me, in terms of this conversation, I felt the book did it better, so I didn't put the movie on the list for that reason. But I can definitely see the appeal.
And I totally understand where you're coming from. I surprised myself that I kept redoing the list and it kept ending up at number 3. I'm like, well, one, I'm attached, and two, it does imply and it does go
Yeah,
there and it does get into uncomfortable spaces that I find a lot of it tends to be straight men are a little alarmed by it, and that means it's doing something. That means it's doing a little
right.
bit. And I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so for me, my number 3 is unfortunately mentioned. It's The Haunting. But I have it up almost as much, not necessarily for the relationship, but because I just absolutely love the movie.
It's
Uh,
great.
yeah, the movie itself kind of warms me over more so than the themes it touches, just based on, like you said, a lot of the censorship at the time, kind of nipping that out of the film. But like you said, enough of it still exists to where its inclusion is still warranted, deservedly so, because it's still a fantastic aspect of the film. But I think the film as a whole, just I enjoy that one so much. It's just so creepy and unnerving, and some of the stuff that it pulls off is just fantastic for the time period. So
Absolute classic.
Yeah, it's just an absolute it's just creepy as hell, and I absolutely love it. I do like Flanagan's adaptation a lot as well. I would love to see that condensed into like a regular feature length format though. Just I think there's maybe one episode too many.
Oh, I wish there'd been more. I just ate it up.
Oh.
I just ate it up, and I've watched it so many times, like, I can't
Oh,
get
okay,
enough
yeah.
of it. But, I think that's just I'm such a maximalist in everything that I do.
Yeah.
There's never enough. If I like it, like, give me all of it and then give me some more.
Okay, yeah, see, I thought that there was one episode too many. I was kind of just like feeling it around 4 and part of 5. I was kind of just like, okay, come on, can we get somewhere with this? But I do love the last 3 episodes. They're amazing. But
Oh
it's
my
just one of
god,
the
talk about crying like a baby. Jeez.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there was parts of it that was kind of like, whoa. I kind of like, that masculine urge to fight back, your tears was kind of it took me it was by surprise how emotional it was. A couple of the scenes were there. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I would love to see a feature film version, condense everything down, but I still really enjoy the adaptation. I'm still not entirely sure which one I like more, Hill House or Bly Manor, but
Yeah, thank you, because most
the
people really hated Bly Manor. Because I was
I
like, "You
came
guys don't understand what a Gothic is, do you?"
I came to it a lot more once I realized that's where it was going. It wasn't a haunted house film. It was a gothic chamber drama with ghosts involved. And
Correct.
I appreciated it a lot more in that regard. Like that I flip back and forth. It depends on my mood because I've had to almost as much just go episode by episode and say, well, which one do I like more? And I'm like 5 to 3. Like I like Hill House episodes to Bly Manor episodes, like just rating them 1 to 1. So yeah, I still have a hard time figuring out which one I like more. So
And
it's
then you
a
throw Midnight Mass in the mix, and you're like, "Oh,
oh, I haven't
shit."
finished Midnight Mass. I only got 2 episodes in. I haven't finished it.
Oh, okay. I'll keep that in
Yeah.
mind.
Okay, yeah. I do want to finish it, but I'm only 2 episodes in. There's just prepping for end of year stuff. It just slipped through the cracks.
I completely understand, but,
Yeah,
you will be so impressed, I hope. I was very impressed.
cool. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it based on what I've heard. But yeah, just I mean, at least as far as the time we're recording this, I only saw the first 2 episodes, and I'd love to get back to it, but end of year stuff and other prep has just gotten in the way. But I'll definitely return and finish it off because I am liking where it's going. I do like I think Hill House started stronger for me out of the 3, but I do still really like where this is going, so I'm definitely keen to return to it.
Yeah, and I will say this for Midnight Mass, just a heads up. It was one that you need a couple episodes and then bam, okay, you're there.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's kind of where I figured because I liked where it was going, but I mean, I was just Hill House was just the one that just got me so immediately
Oh,
that
yeah.
was always yeah, Hill House was the one that just got me immediately, and I was like, okay, I'm on board. So it's just always hard for me to like live up to that one, but I'm definitely intrigued to see where it goes because I am liking it.
Yeah,
So
Mike Flanagan is hands that you can trust.
that's why I've been checking them out. So I'm definitely on board. But yeah, absolutely. Like in regards to the original version of Hill House, not Hill House, The Haunting, classic ghost story. Maybe if I would have been ranking this based on genre criteria, it would slip a little. But I'm gonna allow the rest of the film's qualities to perk it up a little bit. So my number 3.
And I think that's great that you said it that way, because it, I have to admit that I am not a critic, and anybody who listens to my show knows that I rank from the heart. I am not a critic. Um, and when I try to be a critic, I come off as a hard ass. It's just not me. I rank from the heart. It's just like, why do you do a movie review show? Because I fucking want to.
Yeah,
Because I love horror, you know.
yeah,
So I guess we're at number two.
yep.
Um, and I have defense for this as well. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that now because this is a very divisive one, and it is also a very obvious one. It is Sleepaway Camp. Like I said, Angela Baker is showing up again. This movie, I've written actually quite an awesome article about this. Because I am a writer when I fucking get around to it. The show keeps me so busy. Um, but I think it's really important that, considering how early 80s this film, that to explore this theme and where the divisiveness comes, when it's revealed at the end, which if you don't know the twist ending of Sleepaway Camp and you are a horror fan listening to the show, like I'm not even sorry about spoilers. This movie is about as old as I am. So, at the end we get that big reveal. Angela is technically a he and was raised, you know, as a girl. And so we get that crazy end shot that just kind of like completely fucks you up the first time you watch it. And so where that puts the transgender community and the divisiveness is like, well, of course you put the transgender person as this crazy murderer, probably as a result of the transgenderedness. Um, where that's sort of implied. I mean, it's the 80s. We didn't understand. I'm not excusing that. I'm not saying that it's not valid to feel the way that you feel. You don't have to like it. But I do think it's important that it became a topic of conversation. I do think it's important that Felissa Rose, who portrayed Angela Baker in the first film, is such an icon in the LGBTQ community. So many, and I've spoken to Felissa myself. She's a friend of the show, and she's a lovely person. She's a wonderful, lovely person, and so many people line up to meet her. So, and particularly gay men, for some reason, if we're going within the community and go up and say, you know what, you're my icon. You're my, right, and usually right there with Mark Patton, who is the icon. Um, but go and say, that gave me the strength to come out to my family. That made me think about my life and how I felt and reevaluate some things. And it's just this silly, low budget slasher with, a little bit giallo there. Um, where we don't really know who the killer is. We got, oh, it's you, and we know that slashers are born of giallo, but I I really I really think this is an important film, and you don't have to like it, and you don't have to agree with me, but to say that it shouldn't enter the conversation, love it or hate it, would be remiss. Like you would be wrong even if you want to speak out against it. But just the embrace that Felissa Rose and this film gets from the gay community that I have seen firsthand, that I have that I know from her, that I know, it's so important to a lot of people in the community. So, yeah, it's obviously the transgender person is the serial killer or the slasher here, but that's not really the message that the community on the whole is taking from it.
I agree. It's been a while since I've seen it, and I definitely would want to revisit it based on a lot of the themes and stuff that we've discussed. Just because it's been a while since I'd last seen it, I, I, it's hard for me just to talk about that one in general. Just I think I would wanna just like dive into that one just a little bit more based on a lot of what you said. Just how it came out then versus how it is now with a greater acceptance and not just treating transgender as just somebody to like you were mentioning, just because she's a serial killer she has to be the you know she has to be the killer just because she's transgender and stuff like that. But like I said, I would want to revisit the movie just a little bit more recently just to just to be able to have more to say about it. But from what I remember, I do really like it. I do enjoy a lot of the stalking scenes involved. I just want to, like I said, revisit it just to be a little bit more in touch with a lot of the themes and issues involved. So
And one last thing, which so if you're going to revisit, we watch it just all the time. We're big fans here in my house of all the sleepaway camp movies, um but this movie in particular, people forget that there is a gay erotic scene in it in a flashback. So that's something to keep your eyes out that maybe, people don't realize that that's in there. And when we start to get these sort of flashbacks between her father and his lover, and that's also interesting.
cool. I will definitely keep that in mind. My number two, and this is going to be my oddball pick of the, even more so than I think some of the other stuff that I brought up. But this is a true, I wouldn't say oddball. Maybe I misspoke that just because I don't think it's necessarily one that a lot of people have seen. But my number two is a film called Bit.
I have not seen it, but I have heard. I'm familiar with it.
Okay, yeah, I figured that may have been the case. So real quick, so it involves a young girl who moves to Los Angeles to live with her brother for the summer, and falls in with an all-female clique of vampires who basically just run the town secretly. They're basically like the top of the social media chain, and they use their vampire powers to just keep themselves in power. And eventually, they come to find out that the leader that turned them has come back for revenge after thinking they'd been free from him, and chaos ensues. So, not necessarily a lot to, deal with in that sense, just the general plot line. But the main thing for me that this touches on is the fact that not only is the main character in the film transgender, but so is the actress that plays her.
I think that's
And
so important in casting.
yeah, the actress that play I'm still not familiar with pronouns. I'll say that this way: the performer that plays the lead character is transgender, just like the character in the film. And I think that would probably be the most accurate way to put it, just because I'm not familiar with pronouns and I don't know them personally. So I'll just
Yeah,
say
they them is usually a safe ground.
yeah, I'll just say the performer that plays them is transgender, and then the character that they play is transgender in the film as well. And the whole thing is built around the idea of feeling comfortable and safe within your community. And because this is an all female exclusive clique, the idea being that because she's transgender, she feels safe and comfortable with females only. And, there's a bit of a romance that develops, but it's really more about her coming to terms, or I should say, the main character coming to terms with not only the results of the surgery, because they make explicit reference that they're still healing from it. They're still not completely over the effects of the surgery. It's still not completely finished, but also coming to terms with the vampire itself. And because the entire film is a clique about female vampires, the idea being that it's, a sexual relationship between these girls. And I really love it. It's really good. It actually made my favorite films of the year it came out. Not just based on the themes it tackles, but because the film itself is really good.
Well, that sounds
So
phenomenal. I'm gonna put it on my list as well. I'm making a little
yeah,
list as we talk.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's just so much. It's so good. None of it is sleazy or exploitative at all. It's all handled with a lot more restraint and class than a lot of people may be familiar with. So I definitely recommend it. It's really good. And like I said, this came out in 2019, and it was my film of the year. So
That's fantastic. I'm
yeah,
excited to see this now.
yeah, I try to pimp this movie out as much as I can. It's definitely worth it.
Like Me and the Love Witch, basically. We gotta, yeah, that's my movie. I pimp on everybody.
Yeah, so I guess that brings us to our number one choice, and I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Well, I'll preface again. This is really, really obvious, but with a twist. Okay. Obviously, my number one pick, and I can't see how it couldn't be number one for, like it to me, there was no other option for number one, but there's a slash after it, and I'll explain. Would be Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. I
Mm.
am a major, major Freddy fan. Like, we talk about franchises a lot. What's your favorite franchise? On my show, we ask guests. We've argued amongst ourselves. Interestingly enough, the females of the show, we are Freddy people, and the men of the show are Jason. We have a Michael person, and then we have our one Leatherface person. But I am such a big fan of Freddy Krueger because he doesn't have the body count, but he's got the creativity, he's got style, he's got panache, he's got everything. And so what was so interesting about this film is that we go from the first film, and a lot of people, this film has been so universally fucking hated for so many years, and nobody knew where Mark Patton was all this time until the Never Sleep Again documentary, and they finally tracked him down in Mexico where he lives, and because he had some stuff to say, and I'm so glad that he did. Um, it started a conversation. It made the movie get reevaluated by an entire legion of horror fans. This is the first male scream queen. Now, for those who don't know, I own a makeup company with my podcast sister Erica. It's called Final Girl Cosmetics. We do horror themed professional beauty makeup, and we have a palette called the Scream Queen Collection. We are sold out of it right now. We have a color for Jesse, who is played by Mark Patton here, who was a closeted gay man at the time of the filming of this film. And we had when we watched Never Sleep Again, and the slash to this is the Scream Queen documentary, which is Scream, comma Queen. If you have not seen that, it's Mark Patton's documentary about the making of what happened after his life, and it's so important. I can't watch one without the other. So I always yoke them together because I think it's so important, and it makes it worth your while to just keep watching this and keep looking. And also, to know what he went through, and it just makes the movie mean more to you, more to the community. And he is the gay horror icon. He is now an activist. He embraces all the nasty and horrible things that people said about this movie over all those years that no one knew where he was, why he disappeared. Um, the Nancy boy um epithets and things that I don't want to repeat. I don't like those words, but he embraces it, and he uses his voice for good as an actor, and an activist for the LGBT community. And there are so you don't realize, like, the audience, the queer horror audience is massive. It's a huge demographic, and we are now acknowledging that. So that has made this, it has to be number one for me because it is the most important. Robert England in the Scream Queen documentary even says, like, I was trying to make it gayer. He's like, I read the script and I thought, well, this is what they're going for, right? And the hell that Mark Patton went through, and I think I recommend watching that documentary, and then rewatching part 2, and then you will have a new appreciation for it, even if it's just a little bit, as to how important this film is, not just for the horror genre, but in general. This is during gay cancer panic. This is during, AIDS panic. This is when they started testing people for AIDS just to get an acting gig. And, I don't want to tell his journey. Like I said, watch the documentary, but this is the movie. This is the quintessential movie. It's cliche, but cliches have a basis. And and that's, I could go on and on and on about this, but I prefer, at this point, like just let the work speak for itself. Watch the documentary, then rewatch the film, then come back at me with what you got.
Yeah. For me, I if I would have done this as a 10A, it would be my choice. A lot of it, why it fell off, is for exactly what you were saying. Is that a lot of it isn't necessarily in the movie itself, but it comes from the background knowledge of what went on because of Scream Queen. Whereas I think because the documentary explores more of that in depth, I think it kind of I'm trying to figure out what to say here, but because you see that you see what goes on in there versus what went on within the film itself. I think the film, if we're judging it based on the criteria of this list, I think the film just falls a little flat. You need the background knowledge of the documentary, and you need to know what he went through and what went on during the making of the film in order for it to register as much as it does.
And you also have to sort of rethink because there is no
Yeah.
bigger Freddy fan than me, I promise you. It's not, it was never my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film, although I really did like it, much more so than some of the other entries in the franchise. And I don't
Yeah.
consider Freddy versus Jason canon, so everybody can fuck off with that. I don't like that movie. Oh, it's like you can't even talk about it on my show. I don't allow it. But that's just me trying to be funny. Um, but yeah, I think once you rethink the film, I was surprised at how high I rated it, within the series, and that was before watching the doc. And I'd seen Never Sleep
Yeah.
Again, but I hadn't seen the Scream Queen doc. And then when I yoked them together, I was like, oh shit, wow, this movie is so great. And I was surprised at the scores. It was our season 3 finale, and I was just so like almost moved to tears at how much love just my buddies had for it. I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, I was always a fan. I kind of rated it just after the first one and three, which have always been my favorites.
Which, yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of the rule.
yeah. I'm still undecided. I go back and forth. Sometimes I like the general eeriness and creepiness of one, but then the just balls out insanity of three just works for me every now and then.
I'm
So
a Dream Warrior mega fan. I'm actually like my
yeah.
phone case is Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Uh, See, yeah, I go back and forth. So yeah, those are always my one and two, and then the three is part two. Even though I do consider that there to be like a gap between them, but yeah, just if we're going through the conversation at hand, I think the doc explains everything in such great detail that it makes the movie work. So
Yes.
if it would have been a 10A, it would made my choice, but um I mean it's still on my honorable mentions, so you're kind of picking another one of those off. But
Okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, if like I said, if it would have been a 10A, I would have mentioned it, but because I think the doc makes the film work in this context, I kind of just left it as is, kind of like how Interview with a Vampire, where I think the book just the book does it so much better than the film, so it kind of just soured the movie based on the conversation. But I definitely cannot disagree more because of, like you said, what you go through in the documentary that just it enhances the film itself. So if you haven't, like you said, like she said, if you haven't seen either, make that a double bill and call it a night.
Yeah.
So my number one, and this is kind of a, I again another. I think it would probably have made a lot of lists if we would have been doing this. My number one is Hellbent, which is a gay slasher from the early 2000s. Again, it's been a while, so I don't have a lot of concrete ideas around here, but the main gist of the story is a group of gay guys are going out for a night on the town, just, regular Friday night out, nothing special, no real plans or anything, but they end up realizing that they're being stalked throughout the city by a masked killer, picking them off one by one. And when I first saw it, I loved this film, even though I was, not necessarily as exposed to LGBTQ community as because it came out at early 2000s because I saw it right close after its release. I still love the film. It was a slasher film that just happened to have a gay cast. And yeah, some of the stuff was kind of new to me and it wasn't never put me off or anything. I never found myself disgusted by what went on. I found myself engrossed in the group of guys. They're fun. They're, a great, you know, I always say this with a lot of slashers is that one of the big things that turns me off to a lot of them is that they don't feel like a group of friends that would hang out together. They usually just feel like a group of random people thrown together to be a body count.
Yeah,
And that is a huge turn off in slasher films for me because I want to feel the pain of knowing that, anyone in this group can be next and how are they all going to get out of this? I don't care for the body count. The,
that makes
it,
you rare. That makes you rare because usually people just love the kills, love the fodder. I call them human fodder, and I'm like, I want to fucking care about them.
well, and here's the thing, and this is, I'll get back to Hellbent in just a second, but this is a thing that it drives me crazy is that the crazier the kills, the less realistic the film is. Because serial killers are not inventive. Serial killers are not, let's just see what creative way I can use to kill people.
They're methodical.
Yeah, exactly. They're the same thing. They'll slit your throat, they'll stab you, repeatedly with a knife. They'll, maybe some will shoot you or whatever. But 99% of the time, they're going to use the same two or three methods. It's the shock of when it occurs that makes them work. It's not the creativity of what's going on that makes them work. And even though a lot of the early slashers got away with it, I still prefer the more realistic take of would a real human killer do this? Now, if you get, into the supernatural aspect and you start having like, ghosts coming back and, you know,
Or
undead,
supernatural serial killers like Michael Myers, Jason
right?
Voorhees. Those
Yeah,
are just fun to me. Like I'm just like, ah,
yeah.
good night, just to fuck around.
Yeah, I give those a little bit more leeway just because they're not bound by the rules of human physics.
Yes,
But the human killers, I kind of come down on those a little bit harder.
you kind of
And
have to.
yeah, that's like I said, that's one of the reasons why is that, because they're so outlandish and over the top, sometimes, yeah, it's fun to see, a bunch of blood splatter rising up from a person getting chainsawed down the throat. But would a real human killer do that? Or is that just something made up just to make the special effects artist look good? It, I've come to terms with it. It's something that it's me. It's personal. Yes, I'm a gorehound, and yeah, I think it's fun to look at stuff like that from a technical sense, but from a realism standpoint, sometimes that bothers me. But
Yeah, I mean, and I can kind of echo that, I think, because, you check your brain at the door, you're watching a
right,
Freddy or Jason, or I love my 80s slashers, but I know what they are. I know exactly what they are, and I don't take them seriously. Now, when I was mentioning Ari Aster, that's not slasher movies, but it is like I feel emotions, and the emotions elicit fear because you don't want to lose people. You don't want to go through the grieving process. You don't want to get attached, but you are attached, and it makes the movie matter more.
right. The fear is, oh my God, look what he did to that person. What's going to happen if they come after me? I think that's a far more palatable sense of real of fear than, oh my God, he just used the hedge clippers and chopped their head off in one fell swoop. What's going to happen to me?
Right.
Yeah, in that sense, I understand what's going on. Yeah, seeing the person getting a hedge clippers and decapitating them in one swoop. Yeah, it's a cool visual trick. But is it as fearful as, whether or not my sister who's trying to reconcile with her husband and suddenly finds herself being stabbed before his very eyes before they have the chance to reconcile? I think that's a far more terrifying ordeal. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you go back and forth. I mean, like I said, I've come to terms with it. It's just something, for me personally. But um, uh, circling back around to Hellbent, the fact that this is a group of guys, like I said, you enjoy hanging out with them. They're a fun group of guys. They're not overly effeminate. They're not overly outgoing, but they're
They're
all
regular guys.
yeah, they're regular guys. You can clearly tell that they're gay, but they're just regular guys. They're going out, they're having fun, and they just notice that this strange serial killer decked out in BDSM gear and a devil mask is going around hacking them up and chasing them down and killing them one by one. And it works as a straight slasher. If you swap out some of the guys for girls, you can see this as a straightforward slasher. Some of the scenes are terrifying, and they're a lot better done than what you would expect. It's just like I said, the fact that this is an all gay cast, and I think this is one of the, if not the first film that devotes its entire main group to, if not the performers portraying them as gay, at least the characters within the context of the film are gay. And I have to give it props for that. I think it's important to see that kind of representation portrayed on screen, and the fact that, as a straight person, I wasn't offended by it. I've obviously come a lot. Not just me, but as a society, we've come a lot more from where we were back then. So,
Yes.
uh, yeah, I still think the film works, and it works spectacularly well.
And see, that's wonderful. One, to get the gay actors to portray gay characters. I mean,
Oh, they are
that's
gay?
something that, is still going on in Hollywood, where they're like, "Hey, plenty of transgender people, plenty of gay people, plenty of lesbians can play these lesbian roles. You don't have to hire somebody to play a lesbian. I am an actress and I can play a lesbian too. Like, why not?" You
Right,
know?
yeah. Exactly, yeah. I wouldn't say that this may have started the trend, but at least in terms of maybe getting the conversation going, I definitely think it deserves its mention. So
Well, absolutely. That's really, really great.
yeah,
And I think these are the kind of movies that are really for everyone, and sometimes people don't realize the subtext. And there's a lot of subtext. I mean, we could really go on and on. Like, if this was a top 20, geez, I could talk for hours. But it and while I picked some very predictable things, I feel like my defenses were fair and deserved. Um, being a member of the community, being so living so long in the community, um, and just knowing how many horror fans are out there, and they have their icons and they have their franchises that they love, and their favorite villains and their favorite, it's just a wonderful conversation to have, because it's like, for so long the community, it was considered like almost like subhuman. Like, well, why do I want to watch gay people? Well, hey buddy, not everybody's straight.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the. I mean, I don't identify as anyone in the community, but I definitely understood that argument when somebody presented it. So
And that's good.
yeah, it made a lot of sense when the person said it, and it was one of the ones that it helped shape my, not necessarily, I wouldn't say acceptance, but just a lot more. Hey, it's still a film. Let's just take it for what it is. I do understand where you're coming from.
So my honorable mentions were all kind of knocked out. So it leaves me with one, because the other one I'm going to leave off for reasons. And I don't want to give you any spoilers, or anyone else spoilers, because it's relatively a kind of new thing. So I cheated with the
Mm.
one that's left. It's I wanted to bring up the HBO show True Blood, which
Mm.
no shade. Now, books were my first love. Um, I don't care for Charlene Harris's writing, and although the show had its weak points, it did not shy away from having gay, lesbian, bisexual characters and scenes. They were given just as much credence. And again, vampires are the gay icons of horror. Um, like, that's just a thing. That's just a trope, but it's true. But yeah, these were very sexual vampires. There was a lot of sex. It was kind of like, whoa. Um, my virgin eyes. No, I'm kidding. But I think, the character of Lafayette, which was brilliantly played by Nelson Ellis. God, he was my favorite character in the show. But we are using vampires here, um, to bring forth, you know, s- uh, to prevalent some queer actors, some queer characters that are so important in, um, horror lore at this point. Uh, and yeah, the show's been off for a while, but it people still love it, myself included. Even the bad parts, it's still better than the books, and that's really rare that I say that, but the books are just not really well written. So I say,
Mm.
yeah, True Blood needs a mention, even though it's a series.
Nice. I mean, yeah, we kind of mentioned a couple of my honorable mentions. The only other one that I have is Black Sabbath, particularly the segment "The Telephone."
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't I didn't even think about that.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of it would be realizing the Italian version rather than the American version of the segment because I'll just explain real briefly. For those that don't know, Black Sabbath is a Italian anthology from 1963. In the original Italian release, the segments were they were arranged differently than what they were in the U.S. I'll just leave it at that. Well, not only were the segments placed differently, but the original version of this particular segment, which involves a woman who's home alone in her house being repeatedly threatened by mysterious phone calls requiring her to invite her friend over for protection, only for events to unravel from there. A lot of this is not just heavily implied, but it's explicitly stated in the original version that the two girls are lesbians and the entire affair is orchestrated as a means to get the relationship back together. So there's a lot of context and subject matter related to that, which is unfortunately dropped from the American version of the film. It's a lot
Of
more.
course.
Yeah, it's a lot more coded that they're just long friends who've been together. They're just longtime friends, and they're just threatened by whatever. I'm not spoiling much of anything, but yeah, like I said, this was an honorable mention just because I think as a segment it deserves mention, but mentioning the film as a whole, I think was kind of a cheat. So,
Yeah, and that brings me to a segment that I'd like to mention because you just bring it true in my head. I famously shit all over this movie. My husband and I, Sean and Dad, for House of Scream listeners, we were on an old podcast called Behind the Screams. We covered VHS, but there is one segment in there that has a nice little twist. And I cannot recall because I just thought of it. I can't recall the segment. It's the second segment in the original
oh,
VHS.
honeymooners.
Honeymooners, that's it. No, I did shit all over that movie, but I did like what I liked in it, and, that second segment, was an interesting one, and, it had a nice twist, and I liked it. So that was one of the few parts that I did like about it. If you haven't seen VHS, which is weird at this point, if you haven't, especially with the newest one, recently coming out, the second segment, there's a mysterious killer. Of course, because these are just little tiny segments. I believe there's 5 in that. But, the twist is it's the lesbian lover, and they run off after killing the husband. And, I didn't see that coming at
Yeah,
all
yeah.
because it feels, male gazy on purpose. kind of going over her in her underwear and touching her while she's asleep. So you feel like this is a man. No, doesn't have to be.
Mm, yeah, definitely great choice.
I just thought of it. I didn't even have it on my list, but when you brought that up, I was like, "Oh, my brain started turning."
Well, glad to help out, but that
Definitely did.
yeah, that brings us to the end of the episode. So this was as much fun as I thought it would be. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Definitely. So before we leave, you've mentioned several times this show of yours. Go ahead and plug that and anything else that you want listeners to check out about you.
Okay, I have a link tree, which is pretty much the easiest way to find all House That Screams related things. And that's Linktree/Candy the Final Girl. No spaces in that or anything special because I'm not fancy like that. But as far as the House That Screams, we are a horror podcast. We have a couple side casts within the show. We have Ghouls Night Out, which is myself and my podcast sister and bestie Erica, and we do feminist horror reviews on that. We have a new thing called House of Screams Presents Horror Pop Radio, which is a revival of Nico Nice, one of the family, we call them the family. The family members of the House of Screams, his old podcast, reviving that, where we do celeb interviews. That's been a new thing. We're now doing all the celebrity interviews within that. So the past ones, there will not be like that. The newest one was Grady Hendrix, the author of Final Girl Support Group, that he's within that. So that was our first episode, but we have more coming. And then we have Horror Business. We're recording one this following Monday because we're recording this on a Saturday, where we do non-horror movies with horror ties. We only do a couple of those, but we're doing Fight Club. So yeah, mostly it's just horror and us acting ridiculous and having a lot of fun because you can tell we're a really tight group of friends. And I'm looking forward to having you on, Dawn, for Suspiria.
Yeah, well, I was gonna keep it under wraps, but yeah, I
Oh,
will
oh,
be.
Okay. You can edit that out. You can edit that
No,
out.
no worries. Yeah, it's gonna be okay. But yeah, I will be as you I guess in the business say cross promoting, and I will join them for an episode on Suspiria. So
Yeah, we are really looking forward to it. So yeah, House
yeah.
Screams, all major platforms.
And yeah, I will absolutely share their links in the show notes below. So make sure you check that out. And like I said, thank you for joining me. This was so much fun. I definitely appreciate it.
Oh, it was really, really fun. Thank you for having me. And again, I want to thank you for all of your hard work within the horror community on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on and so forth. You've done wonders for my show, and I can't thank you enough. And that's thank you from all of us.
That my pleasure. Just happy to help out.
Yeah, I'm the mouth of the show, so.
All right. So thank you all for joining in, and stay tuned till next time for another fun topic. We will see you then.